Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hills Energy and Environmental Summit. We're going to go straight through until lunch, which won't be long, which you will be able, and at lunch you'll be able to grab on your way out. Just a reminder, if you need to leave the room for any reason before lunch, please do so quietly between sessions so as not to disrupt the conversations on stage. Okay, speaking of on stage, next up we'll hear from two Gen Zers on the youth view of energy and the environment. But first, let's hear from another prominent Gen Z environmentalist, none other than Greta Thunberg.
The climate crisis is an existential crisis. 2024 is on track to become the hottest year ever recorded, and last year global greenhouse gas emissions reached an all-time high. In this moment that the UNFCCC is hosting yet another COP climate meeting in an authoritarian petrostate is beyond absurd. I'm not going there because of this extreme hypocrisy. These COP processes are not leading to any meaningful change. The emissions keep on increasing and we keep moving in the wrong direction, even though the science and those affected by the climate crisis have been warning us for decades about the consequences. Whatever the people in power are doing, they are doing it wrong, because this is only leading us further, deeper into deeper injustices and a climate catastrophe.
A climate catastrophe. Please welcome back to the stage Rachel Frazin. She is joined by panelist Chris Barnard. He's the president of the American Conservation Coalition. And Pavan Venkatakrishnan, an infrastructure fellow at the Institute for Progress. Welcome. Hello. Good to see you. Rachel, all yours.
Hi guys, thanks for being with us and being our representative young people. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. Do you guys think that young people do care more about this issue? And if so, how do they talk to older folks about it?
Can I start? I definitely do think young people care about climate issues. But I would say that it is not necessarily true that climate issues are more important to young voters than the cost of living or any other kitchen table issue that affects voters of every demographic. And oftentimes climate and those kitchen table issues can go hand in hand. We need a reliable grid. We need low costs. So there's definitely a great deal of intersection, but I wouldn't say that climate change is young voters' number one issue. But I imagine Chris has a better perspective.
Well, I think you're younger, so you probably have a better perspective. But I would echo what Pavan just said. The polling shows that, on average, young people do care more about this. Part of that is because when we went to school, when we talked with our peers, the things that were coming out of Hollywood, documentaries, like all those kinds of things did talk about this more. And so it's just something that we've always grown up around. But I do think that there is an important element where things are shifting. Like, it's no longer kind of 2017, 2018 era climate activism among young people. There are a lot of issues in the modern world that are also important to our generation, whether it's affording a house, the cost of living, like growing up and thinking about like things like taxes and children and all that. So I would say that part of the issue that's happened in the climate movement has been a little bit of a myopic focus on the issue and not necessarily tying it into other parts of like other issues that might matter to voters as well and to young people especially. And so basically echo what Pavan said on that.
So has climate activism shifted since like 2017, 2018? And if so, what does that shift look like? And do you think it's more effective now or less or about the same?
I think it's much less effective now. I think there's been a sense from a lot of people that climate activism has become increasingly extreme. You think of the young people blocking traffic or throwing soup at the Mona Lisa or things like that. And most normal people look at that and say, I don't want anything to do with that. I really think that a lot of the climate movement has overplayed its hand. We even go back to like some of the predictions Al Gore made that didn't come true. Obviously, these are issues that are important and that we need to address, but fear-mongering or moralizing about it has actually served the opposite purpose, I think, of pushing a lot of people away from these issues. So I think climate activism, so to speak, is like for the most part, a quite irrelevant force in American politics right now, at least with this administration and with where we are in the country. That doesn't mean we shouldn't care about these issues. It just means that we've gone about it the wrong way, and which is why we talk about things like reliable grids and energy abundance, balancing it with other issues. You can have both a thriving economy and tackle climate change. Like, those are all things that you need to be doing, but some of the extremism has turned a lot of people off, I'm afraid.
Well, I would just add, definitely the tenor of activism has changed a great deal. The 2018 kind of period of where, you know, the Green New Deal is a landmark of ambition on climate issues, and I think it's positive. The people who were nominally very pro-climate are now talking about manufacturing and onshoring and grid reliability. So at least in DC, I think you've seen a positive move towards more practical issues that are aligned with, you know, a national competitive vision.
And Pavan, I wanted to ask you, so what strategy or what approach do you think Democrats or people who care about climate change should be taking in this administration? Should you be looking for areas of compromise and bipartisan agreement, or should you be resisting, you know, the Trump administration's cuts to climate science and climate regulations, or should it be a mix of both? Should there be some resistance in there and also some compromise?
Well, I mean, I think it's an issue-dependent question, right? Like, if you talk about energy tax credits, that's a reconciliation process. Republicans are going to move to pass a bill. They're not going to need Democratic votes for that. But if you look at permitting reform, it is clear to me, clear to everyone probably in this room and industry, we've got to deploy projects far quicker than we are right now, and that's going to take the regular order for the most part, and Democrats will need to come to the table because it's not an oil and gas issue. It's not a renewable issue. It's a deployment issue for every technology, and I think Democrats need to be engaged.
And Chris, I wanted to ask you about the IRA tax credits. In your conversations with Republicans, what do they make of those credits? Do you think that any of them are likely to stay in place? Are we looking at a full repeal here? Are we looking at early sunsets? Like, give us a prediction. Where are we going?
Yeah, I think a lot of Republicans, especially in leadership, became skeptical of the IRA because of the partisan process through which it played out. I think that's just a reflection of the politics that we live under right now in this country. That being said, a lot of the individual bills that ended up being a part of the IRA actually had bipartisan support. We saw, as of this morning, a new bill, bipartisan bill that was introduced to even extend the 45X manufacturing tax credit. I think there are specific parts of it that do have Republican support, but they didn't really buy into the way that the package was done more broadly. My guess is that there are some tax credits that are more safe, so to speak, than other tax credits. I think you're likely to see, for example, like the EV tax credits and things like that to be cut. But things like 45Q, which is for carbon capture, 45X, 45V for hydrogen, 45U for nuclear, are much more popular with rank and file Republicans. And part of that's a reflection of the districts that they represent, right? Almost 2/3 of investments from the IRA have been flowing to Republican districts. I think it's going to be a very interesting fight in terms of how to make the dollars match up. But my guess is that there will be some version of those tax credits that stay. Just depends on how exactly those will turn out to look.
And what about renewables like solar and wind? Like, do you think those might stay or go, or is that still an open question?
I think it's an open question on what exactly happens to them. So there's like either early sunsets that might happen. There might be kind of links to how to make them be more reliable and less intermittent, whether it's like backup battery storage and things like that. I think on the whole, like most of these renewable projects are actually in Republican districts, and a lot of Republicans see the economic benefits and the jobs flowing to their districts as a result. But there are still concerns over kind of at mass subsidizing intermittent generation, and how do you balance that with the importance of a reliable grid? And so I think that that'll be something that has to kind of be played out in relationship to some of the other tax credits as well.
I wanted to ask you both about permitting reform. As you know, we have sort of been at an impasse here for months, if not years at this point. Seems like both Democrats and Republicans want a permitting reform deal, but there's a lot of disagreement on the specifics and how to do it and which, I guess, technologies get sped up. Do you believe that we will be able to move past this impasse, and what would that take?
I think so. I think the primary barrier to negotiations thus far has been that Democrats want to do transmission reform and Republicans want to do reform for oil and gas. And that is in a way linked to what happens to IRA tax credits, right? Like as long as Republicans are still debating what those credits look like in the future, it's going to be hard to reach a bipartisan agreement. But it is true more than ever with load growth, with our national vision of competing with China. You cannot have 10-year timelines for projects, whether they're oil and gas or not. It means recognizing that all the above strategy that panelists have talked about before us. I think there will be a moment fairly soon where action is untenable, inaction is untenable. And I think you'll see a robust bipartisan negotiation, ultimately a bill.
Yeah, I would add that, in my opinion, the number one thing we can be doing right now to help build in America, to reduce emissions, and ultimately to tackle climate issues is to pass a robust, comprehensive permitting reform package. The data shows that 80 to 90% of the emissions reductions potential of the IRA will be wasted if we do not have permitting reform. And I would encourage Democrats to kind of see this as like something that's very much aligned with what they want. And I know there's concerns over like building more pipelines or locking oil and gas production. My view is that we need to disrupt the status quo because the status quo basically benefits incumbent technologies, and permitting reform is the best way to give renewables and like manufacturing and nuclear and all those other technologies that are critically important an opportunity to actually compete. And I think we should have passed the Manchin-Barrasso bill at the end of last year. Politics got in the way, unfortunately. I doubt that we'll get a permitting bill this year because I think reconciliation is going to drag out longer than most of us anticipate. But I am optimistic about a bill sometime this Congress, and I hope that there will be enough Democrats in the Senate that are willing to play ball.
And Pavan, obviously you support permitting reform. Should your fellow Democrats support permitting reform? As you mentioned, there are a lot of hurdles and it does take a long time to get renewable energy on the grid, but it also speeds up fossil fuels. And I know among the Democrats in particular, there's concerns about, I guess, the robustness of environmental review and, are we giving projects, be they renewable or fossil or something else, like a good hard look and really considering the environmental impacts?
I think it's incredibly important for Democrats and Republicans to engage on a bipartisan permitting reform process. And especially for Democrats, the work of like the energy tax credit suite is not complete until regulatory pathways are clear. You can provide tax credits across the board, but if it is impossible to permit the projects those credits are tied to, they're ultimately useless. So it's incredibly important for members of both parties to recognize that and to engage because our competitors internationally are definitely not waiting.
Yeah, I'll just add that if you actually look at the projects currently held up in permitting purgatory, the vast majority of those are renewable energy and clean energy projects. And I know, like I mentioned earlier, Democrats are worried about like the ability to permit like fossil fuel projects faster and things like that, but this would disproportionately benefit clean energy projects because that's where a lot of the investment is. That's where a lot of the market is. But to Pavan's point, all that money is pretty much useless if you don't have the ability to actually build it. Right now, we have more renewables and interconnection queues across this country than we have on the grid. The only way you solve that is by permitting, building out transmission, and doing the work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of the concerns that primarily progressive environmentalists have about permitting reform are hypothetical and ideological as opposed to practical. And if you look at the data, it's just extremely clear that permitting reform is the number one thing we can do to unlock all of this.
Chris, going in a little bit of a different direction, I want to ask you about sort of your conversations with Republicans. When you bring up climate change in front of Republicans, do they recoil? Like, how do they react? And, I know publicly many Republicans do not even acknowledge that climate change is real and man-made. How do you talk to those people about this issue?
Yeah, the first thing I would point out is that there is a caucus called the Conservative Climate Caucus. I think it's the fourth largest caucus in Congress, has 85 Republicans in it who say this is a real issue and we need to do something about it. And so I think we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years. Obviously, we're not at a moment right now politically where climate is something that a lot of people are necessarily talking about. And I think one of the problems that has happened is we've associated climate with kind of large sacrifices or like Republicans think that it's about telling people how to live or smuggling in other progressive policy priorities. Like we mentioned the Green New Deal, the people who wrote the Green New Deal said it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. And I think a lot of Republicans have become skeptical of what that looks like. But there's an opportunity to link climate to things like winning the clean energy arms race with China, to making it easier to build, to reindustrializing, to bringing manufacturing back to America. And you don't necessarily need to kind of hammer and moralize about the climate aspect of that while still being able to make progress on emissions reductions, on clean energy. I think there are a lot of Republicans that are open to that. We've seen some of them sign letters with regards to the tax credits and things like that. And I would say that we should use language that actually appeals to Republicans that are elected, but also Republicans back home in their districts, so that we avoid kind of this negative reaction that they associate with climate.
I would just add, IFP has the advantage of not being, number one, a partisan think tank, but not being next a climate think tank. We're an innovation policy group. So when we're talking to Republicans, we find a great deal of alignment looking at energy issues as an innovation issue, deployment issue. We're very interested in, obviously, in building nuclear, deploying geothermal. So when we're talking to Republicans, we're emphasizing, look, like with deploying nuclear, it's a cost of capital problem. If you don't have, for example, the tech-neutral investment tax credit, the tech-neutral production tax credit, if you don't have an LPO that is appropriately manned, we will be unable to build new nuclear in this country. There is no amount of permitting reform that is going to address that problem if you don't have capital to make these projects pencil. So we find a lot of alignment with Republicans when we're talking in those terms, and clearly identifying what are the bottlenecks to deploying the technologies which the administration wants to deploy. I think they're 100% right about energy dominance, 100% right about innovation at home, 100% right about onshoring. But the truth is that doesn't happen if administration and leaders in Congress cannot look past, maybe a partisan process that enacts tax credits or provides authority to LPO. I think there's a great opportunity to repurpose the incentives and authorities that were created by a Democratic administration and Democratic Congress for the president's objectives, and to make his electoral mandate a reality.
Just one quick additional thought, and I'm curious what you make of this. I think that part of the problem with climate politics in this country, and I think you're seeing that replicate a little bit across the world, is that climate has become a purity test for people as opposed to an actual way to get things done. What I mean by that is a lot of climate politics is focused on fairly abstract things that most people don't really understand, like whether it's parts per million or net zero or UNFCCC targets. Like there's all these things that are like floating above, and most regular people look at that and they're like, I have no clue what it means. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's become a purity test, and we're always trying to, when I say we, I'm not, but the climate movement is always trying to like retrofit whatever is happening through this prism of like, okay, how can we do this on climate change? I think there's a lot you can do that will have climate benefits and emissions reductions benefits, but that also achieve energy dominance, that also compete with China, that reindustrialize. And I just think that it's important to not impose those purity tests and work in the art of the possible and within the Overton window that we have right now. And it's exciting that organizations like mine, which is a center-right organization, are able to work with organizations like Pavan's, which are more, I guess, center-left, the right word to use, on the actual issues that we can do right now, rather than being like the angry man, like shaking our fists at the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And do you bring these messages to this administration, and how do they react to that kind of messaging? I feel like it seems like the policy right now is everything except for wind and solar. Like they do seem supportive of things like geothermal. They're much less supportive of wind, for example. Should people in your space be then sticking to things like geothermal as a solution, or things like nuclear, or should you be trying to push the administration to embrace, I guess, all of the above?
Yeah, I think all of the above is the right approach, especially in an era where the AI arms race with China will basically be lost or won within the next 5 years. If we have a 6 to 7 year wait time for new gas turbines, then you're going to have to fill that energy somehow. And like Heather Reams on the previous panel said, like a lot of that can be renewables that is immediately deployable. With permitting reform, you can actually solve some of those interconnection issues. And so I think all of the above is the right approach. I think you don't want to take the California approach where you're like shutting down base load and then also over-incentivizing intermittent energy and then you destabilize your grid. But you can take the Texas approach, right? Like be the #1 leader in both wind and solar across the country, but also have nuclear, also have natural gas. I think that is the right approach to this. And especially if we're trying to win this AI race, we need to have any electron and any molecule that we can. And that's just critical. So I would hope that the administration can lean into that. But my point to people who are working with the administration or advocating to the administration is don't make moralistic arguments about it. Make tangible, real-life, practical arguments and say, like, look, the AI race, like competing with China, manufacturing, like these are all things that actually appeal to the administration. And I think that like the 100 days are always like a bit of a unique beast in terms of like campaign promises and kind of trying to go fast, and especially with the landslide that happened, I feel like it feels like the administration felt emboldened to just like see how much they could push. But I do think that there's a lot of people in industry and other areas that are kind of trying to reshape some of that energy to be productive. And I think that's where I think we can make some progress.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm sure everyone on the previous panels has talked about tariffs and the trade environment. There is a proven policy playbook to accomplish the president's goals, Republicans in Congress's goals. Starts with making the most pro-growth provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent, retaining these energy tax credits, right-sizing our regulatory regime in the executive and in Congress. There's room for smart trade policy adjustments, but there's a clear playbook here. And we need to get past kind of the partisanship and embrace the tools that we have right now and ensure that we're deploying, because no other country is waiting.
Well, thank you guys for a great discussion. I really appreciated your perspectives.
All right.